Sarah Martinez looked like any other single mother pushing her 5-year-old daughter Emma on the playground swing that sunny Tuesday afternoon. Her ponytail bounced with each gentle push, her laugh mixed with Emma's giggles, and her worn sneakers kicked at the wood chips beneath their feet. To anyone watching, she was just another mom in faded jeans and a simple blue t-shirt, taking her daughter to the park after picking her up from kindergarten. But appearances can be dangerously deceiving. 3 men in a black SUV had been watching Sarah for weeks, studying her routine, noting her patterns, waiting for the perfect moment. They saw a vulnerable target, a woman alone with a small child, no wedding ring, no obvious protection. They had no idea they were stalking someone who had spent 12 years in the most elite fighting force in the world, someone who had completed missions in the darkest corners of the globe, someone trained to kill with her bare hands. They had no idea that beneath the gentle exterior lived a warrior who would go to any length to protect her child. When those 3 men finally made their move that afternoon, they thought they were cornering easy prey. Instead, they awakened something they never saw coming, a mother's fury combined with a Navy SEAL's lethal training. What happened next would become the kind of story that makes people lock their doors at night and think twice about judging others by their appearance. This is the true story of how 3 predators learned the hardest lesson of their lives: never underestimate a mother protecting her child, especially when that mother happens to be one of America's most dangerous warriors. Sarah Martinez wiped the sweat from her forehead as she finished loading the last box into her Honda Civic. Moving day had finally arrived, and, after 6 months of planning, she and her daughter Emma were leaving their cramped apartment for a small house across town. The morning sun cast long shadows across the parking lot as neighbors she barely knew walked past without a second glance. At 32, Sarah had learned to blend in wherever she went. Her shoulder-length brown hair was usually pulled back in a simple ponytail, her clothes were practical rather than fashionable, and she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who preferred to observe rather than be observed. Most people saw exactly what she wanted them to see: a hard-working single mother doing her best to provide for her daughter. What they didn't see was the way her eyes automatically scanned every room she entered, mapping exits and potential threats. They didn't notice how she positioned herself to keep her back to walls whenever possible, or how her seemingly casual glances were actually tactical assessments of her surroundings. These habits were so deeply ingrained after 12 years in the Navy SEALs that she barely realized she still did them, even 3 years after leaving the service. Emma bounced excitedly in her car seat as they drove through their new neighborhood. At 5 years old, she had her mother's dark hair and curious brown eyes, but possessed an innocence that Sarah was determined to protect at all costs. The little girl pressed her face against the window, pointing at playgrounds and ice cream shops as they passed. "Mommy, will there be other kids to play with?" Emma asked, her voice filled with the hope that only children possess. "I'm sure there will be, sweetheart," Sarah replied, glancing at her daughter in the rearview mirror. "We'll explore the neighborhood once we get settled." Their new home was a modest 2-bedroom house on Maple Street, with a small front yard and a fence that needed painting. It wasn't much, but it was theirs, and, after years of apartment living, having their own space felt like a luxury. Sarah had saved every penny from her job at the local hardware store to make this move possible, working double shifts whenever she could to build a better life for Emma. As they pulled into the driveway, Sarah noticed a black SUV parked across the street. 2 men sat in the front seats, their faces partially obscured by the tinted windows. Something about their stillness triggered her instincts, but when she looked again a few minutes later, the vehicle was gone. She made a mental note but didn't dwell on it. Old habits died hard, and she'd learned long ago that paranoia could be just as dangerous as complacency. The next few hours were spent in the familiar chaos of unpacking. Sarah moved efficiently from room to room, her organizational skills honed by years of military precision. Emma helped by unpacking her toys and arranging them in elaborate patterns across her new bedroom floor. The house slowly began to feel like home as familiar belongings found their places in unfamiliar spaces. By evening, most of the essential items were unpacked, and Sarah decided they deserved a treat. The local pizza place delivered to their area, and they ate their dinner sitting on boxes in the living room, Emma chattering excitedly about her new room and the big backyard where she could play. "This is the best day ever, Mommy," Emma declared around a mouthful of pepperoni pizza. Sarah smiled, feeling a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the food. These moments of pure happiness with her daughter made every sacrifice worth it. She'd given up a career she'd trained her entire adult life for, left behind the only family she'd ever known in her SEAL team, all to give Emma a normal, safe childhood. That night, after Emma had fallen asleep in her new bed, Sarah stood at the living room window looking out at their quiet street. Maple Street was lined with modest homes, each with its own small yard and individual character. Porch lights cast gentle circles of yellow light along the sidewalk, and the occasional dog walker passed by in the comfortable routine of suburbia. This was exactly the life she'd dreamed of during those long deployments overseas: normal, peaceful, safe. No more midnight raids, no more hostile territories, no more wondering if she'd make it home to see Emma's next birthday. Just the simple pleasure of being a mother in a neighborhood where the biggest worry was whether the garbage truck came on Tuesday or Wednesday. Sarah had met Emma's father during her last deployment. Jake Patterson was a fellow SEAL, tough and fearless in combat, but gentle and kind during their brief time together. Their relationship had been intense but short-lived, cut tragically short when Jake was killed in action during what should have been a routine mission. Sarah discovered she was pregnant 2 weeks after his funeral. The pregnancy had ended her military career sooner than planned, but she'd never regretted the decision to leave. Emma was the most important mission of her life now, and Sarah approached motherhood with the same dedication and intensity she'd once brought to her military service. The difference was that failure was not an option when it came to protecting her daughter. She'd chosen this neighborhood specifically because it was quiet, family-friendly, and far enough from the city to feel safe but close enough for her to commute to work. The schools were good, crime rates were low, and the neighbors seemed like the kind of people who looked out for each other. It was everything she'd hoped for when she'd started planning this new chapter of their lives. Sarah performed her nightly security check before bed, a habit she couldn't shake even in their safe suburban home. She tested the locks on all doors and windows, checked the sightlines from the street, and made sure Emma's room had clear access to multiple exit routes. It might have seemed excessive for a quiet neighborhood like Maple Street, but Sarah knew that threats could come from anywhere, and preparation was the key to protection. As she finally settled into her own bed, Sarah felt a sense of accomplishment she hadn't experienced in months. They'd made it to their new home, Emma was happy and safe, and tomorrow would bring new opportunities to build the life she'd always wanted for them. The black SUV she'd seen earlier was completely forgotten, dismissed as just another vehicle in a busy world. She had no way of knowing that 3 men had spent the evening parked at various locations around the neighborhood, taking note of her house, her car, and her routine. They'd watched her move with the efficient precision of someone accustomed to physical work, observed the careful way she scanned her surroundings, and noted that she appeared to live alone with just her young daughter. To them, she looked like the perfect target: isolated, vulnerable, and unlikely to put up much resistance. They had no idea they were planning to attack someone who had completed some of the most dangerous military training in the world, someone who had faced enemy combatants in life-or-death situations, someone whose protective instincts were matched only by her lethal capabilities. The men in the black SUV saw a single mother they thought they could easily overpower. Sarah Martinez, former Navy SEAL, saw only a daughter she would die to protect and a new life she would kill to preserve. Neither side fully understood what they were walking into, but only one side would emerge unscathed from the confrontation that was now inevitable. As Sarah drifted off to sleep in her new home, she couldn't have imagined that within days, those years of training she tried to leave behind would become the only thing standing between her daughter and unthinkable danger. The peaceful suburban life she'd fought so hard to build was about to collide with the violent world she'd worked so hard to escape. The first week in their new home passed peacefully, with Sarah falling into a comfortable routine that felt almost too good to be true. Every morning, she would make Emma breakfast while packing her lunch, drive her to kindergarten at Westfield Elementary, then head to her job at Morrison's hardware store downtown. The work was honest and straightforward, helping customers find the right tools, managing inventory, and occasionally lifting heavy supplies that impressed her male co-workers with her unexpected strength. Sarah had deliberately chosen a job that used her practical skills without drawing attention to her military background. She knew how to fix almost anything, understood the proper applications for every tool in the store, and could recommend solutions to problems that had customers shaking their heads in amazement. To them, she was just a remarkably handy single mom who seemed to know everything about construction and repair work. What her co-workers didn't know was that her extensive knowledge came from years of training in demolitions, tactical operations, and field repairs in some of the world's most challenging environments. She could build improvised explosive devices, breach reinforced structures, and repair critical equipment under enemy fire, but she let people believe her skills came from helping her father with home improvement projects as a child. The routine felt wonderfully normal. Pick up Emma from school, stop at the park if the weather was nice, head home for dinner and homework, then bedtime stories and quiet evenings. It was the kind of life Sarah had dreamed about during those long nights overseas, when the sound of gunfire in the distance made sleep impossible and thoughts of home were the only thing that kept her sane. But the black SUV kept appearing. At first, Sarah told herself it was just coincidence. Lots of people drove black SUVs, and, in a town this size, it wasn't unusual to see the same vehicles in different locations throughout the week. But her training had taught her to trust her instincts, and something about this particular vehicle felt wrong. It appeared too often, lingered too long, and the occupants seemed more interested in watching than in whatever business had supposedly brought them to the area. On Thursday afternoon, Sarah spotted the SUV parked outside Emma's school during pickup time. She made a mental note of the license plate and drove a circuitous route home, taking several unnecessary turns to see if they were being followed. The vehicle didn't appear again that day, but Sarah found herself checking her mirrors more frequently and paying closer attention to her surroundings. Friday brought another sighting, this time outside Morrison's Hardware while Sarah was working. She noticed it through the store window during her afternoon break, parked across the street with two figures visible in the front seats. When she looked again 20 minutes later, it was gone, but the feeling of being watched lingered like an itch she couldn't scratch. That evening, Sarah made a decision that would have seemed paranoid to most people but felt like simple prudence to someone with her background. She began varying her routines, taking different routes to and from work, arriving at Emma's school at slightly different times, and making random stops at various stores around town. If someone was tracking her movements, she wanted to make their job as difficult as possible. She also started carrying her concealed weapon again, something she'd stopped doing after moving to Maple Street. Sarah had a valid permit and had maintained her marksmanship skills with regular practice at a shooting range outside of town, but she'd hoped that suburban life would be peaceful enough that she wouldn't need to arm herself for simple errands like grocery shopping and school pickups. The weekend arrived without further incidents, and Sarah began to wonder if she was overreacting. Emma was thrilled to spend Saturday morning exploring their new neighborhood, and they took a long walk through the nearby residential streets, with Emma pointing out interesting houses and asking questions about the families who might live in them. Sunday afternoon found them at Riverside Park, a large community space about 10 minutes from their house. Emma ran straight for the playground while Sarah found a bench with clear sightlines in all directions. The park was busy with families enjoying the unseasonably warm October weather, and the sounds of children playing and parents chatting created a pleasant background of suburban normalcy. Sarah was pushing Emma on the swings when she noticed him, a man in his 30s with short dark hair and cold eyes, standing near the parking area and watching them with an intensity that immediately raised her alert level. He wasn't dressed like a typical parent or casual park visitor, wearing dark jeans and a leather jacket despite the warm afternoon. More importantly, he wasn't watching the children play or interacting with anyone else in the park. He was watching her. Sarah continued pushing Emma's swing while keeping the man in her peripheral vision, using techniques she'd learned for conducting surveillance while appearing to focus on other activities. The man made no attempt to approach them, but he also made no attempt to disguise his interest in their activities. After about 15 minutes, he walked back toward the parking area and disappeared from view. "Higher, Mommy!" Emma called out, oblivious to the tension that had suddenly filled her mother's body. "Okay, sweetheart, but just a few more minutes," Sarah replied, her voice carefully controlled. "Then, we should head home for dinner." As they walked back toward their car, Sarah scanned the parking area but saw no sign of the man or the black SUV. Still, the encounter had shattered her growing sense of security and confirmed what her instincts had been telling her all week: someone was definitely watching them, and it wasn't random. That night, after Emma was asleep, Sarah sat at her kitchen table with a notepad, writing down every detail she could remember about the vehicle and its occupants. license plate number, approximate ages and descriptions of the men she'd seen, times and locations of each sighting, and any other relevant details that might help her understand what she was dealing with. The methodical documentation felt familiar, taking her back to intelligence gathering and threat assessment procedures she'd used countless times during her military service. The difference was that then, she'd been protecting military installations and fellow soldiers from known enemy combatants. Now, she was trying to protect her 5-year-old daughter from unknown threats in what was supposed to be a safe suburban neighborhood. Sarah also began preparing contingency plans, another habit from her SEAL training that had served her well in dangerous situations. She identified multiple escape routes from their house, located the nearest police station and hospital, and made sure Emma knew how to dial 911 and what information to give if they ever became separated. To Emma, these seemed like fun games and interesting new rules, but, to Sarah, they were potentially life-saving preparations. Monday brought a return to their regular routine, but, with Sarah maintaining a much higher level of alertness. She varied their route to school, took Emma inside rather than using the drop-off lane, and made sure to chat with other parents and teachers to establish her presence and create witnesses who would notice if anything unusual happened. The black SUV didn't appear on Monday or Tuesday, and Sarah began to hope that whatever interest the occupants had in her family might be fading. Perhaps they'd realized that she was aware of their surveillance and had moved on to easier targets. Perhaps it had been a case of mistaken identity, and they'd figured out their error. Wednesday shattered those hopeful theories. Sarah was leaving Morrison's Hardware at the end of her shift when she spotted not one but 2 black SUVs parked in different locations around the store. The positioning was clearly tactical, covering multiple exit routes and providing overlapping fields of observation. This wasn't casual surveillance anymore, this was professional tracking by people who understood tactical procedures. Sarah's blood ran cold as she realized the implications. Amateur criminals might follow someone for a few days before losing interest or making their move, but this level of organized surveillance suggested something much more serious. These people had resources, training, and patience. They were planning something big, and they were willing to invest significant time and effort to make sure they got it right. As Sarah drove toward Emma's school, her mind raced through possible explanations. Had someone from her military past tracked her down? Was this connected to classified operations she'd been involved in during her SEAL career? Had she inadvertently witnessed something that made her a threat to criminal operations in the area? None of the scenarios she could imagine ended well for her and Emma. Sarah picked up her daughter from school with a bright smile and cheerful conversation, but her eyes never stopped moving, scanning for threats and planning responses to various attack scenarios. Emma chattered happily about her day, completely unaware that her mother was conducting tactical assessments while helping her with her seatbelt. That evening, Sarah made a decision she'd hoped never to have to make. She retrieved a secure phone from her hidden emergency kit and called a number she'd memorized but never expected to use. The voice that answered was gruff but familiar, belonging to Marcus Webb, her former team leader and one of the few people in the world she trusted completely. "Marcus, it's Sarah. I need help." The conversation was brief but efficient. Marcus listened without interruption as Sarah described the surveillance and her growing concerns for Emma's safety. He asked pointed questions about timing, tactics, and possible connections to their past operations. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment before responding. "This doesn't sound random, Sarah. Professional surveillance teams don't waste this much time on ordinary civilians. Someone wants something from you, and they're being very careful about how they go after it." "What do I do?" Sarah asked, hating the vulnerability in her own voice. "Trust your instincts, stay alert, and be ready to move fast if things go bad. I'll make some calls, see if any of our old enemies have surfaced recently or if there's chatter about operations targeting former team members. But, Sarah, if they make a move, you know what you need to do." Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of her past life settling back onto her shoulders like a familiar but unwelcome burden. She tried so hard to become just another suburban mother, to leave the warrior behind and embrace the simple joy of raising her daughter in peace. But some enemies never forget, and some skills can never be completely abandoned. "I know," she said quietly. "Thanks, Marcus. stay safe, and keep that little girl of yours safe too. We'll find out who's behind this." As Sarah hung up the phone, she realized that the peaceful life she'd built on Maple Street was probably over, regardless of how this situation resolved. Even if the immediate threat passed, she would never again feel completely safe in their quiet suburban home. The world she'd tried to escape had found her, and it was only a matter of time before the collision between her two lives became violent and inevitable. Thursday morning arrived with an eerie stillness that set Sarah's nerves on edge. The autumn air was crisp and clean, with golden leaves drifting down from the maple trees that gave their street its name, but the peaceful suburban scene felt like the calm before a storm. Sarah had learned to trust her instincts during 12 years of military service, and every instinct she possessed was screaming that something was about to happen. Emma bounced around the kitchen in her favorite purple dress, chattering excitedly about show and tell at school. She'd chosen to bring her collection of seashells that she and Sarah had gathered during a weekend trip to the coast last month, and she was practicing her presentation between bites of cereal. The normalcy of her daughter's routine created a surreal contrast to the tactical preparation Sarah was making in her mind. As they drove to school, Sarah took a route she'd never used before, winding through residential streets that would make surveillance difficult and reveal any vehicles attempting to follow them. The black SUVs were nowhere to be seen, but their absence felt more ominous than their presence had. In her experience, when enemies disappeared, it usually meant they were getting ready to strike. At Westfield Elementary, Sarah walked Emma inside instead of using the drop-off lane, taking the opportunity to speak with Mrs. Henderson, Emma's teacher, and Mr. Rodriguez, the school principal. She explained that she was concerned about strangers who might be watching the school and asked them to be extra vigilant about pickup procedures. She gave them Marcus Webb's phone number as an emergency contact, identifying him as Emma's uncle who was authorized to collect her if Sarah was unavailable. Mrs. Henderson, a kind woman in her 50s who'd been teaching kindergarten for over 20 years, took Sarah's concerns seriously without asking too many questions. "We always maintain strict security protocols," she assured Sarah, "but we'll make sure to keep an extra eye on Emma today." Sarah hugged her daughter goodbye, holding her a moment longer than usual and breathing in the sweet scent of her strawberry shampoo. "Have a wonderful day, sweetheart. I love you so much." "Love you too, Mommy," Emma called out as she skipped toward her classroom, her backpack bouncing with each step. At Morrison's Hardware, Sarah found it difficult to concentrate on her usual tasks. She moved through the motions of helping customers and organizing inventory, but her attention was constantly divided between her work and surveillance of the surrounding area. The store's large windows provided excellent visibility of the parking lot and street, but they also made her feel exposed and vulnerable. Around 10 in the morning, her manager, Dave Morrison, approached her with a concerned expression. Dave was in his 60s, a former contractor who'd built his business over 30 years through honest work and fair dealing. He'd always treated Sarah with respect and kindness, and she'd come to think of him almost like a father figure. "Sarah, you seem distracted today. Everything okay at home?" Dave asked, his weathered face creased with genuine worry. Sarah hesitated, unsure how much she should reveal. "I've been having some concerns about strangers in the neighborhood. Probably nothing serious, but it's got me a little on edge." Dave nodded thoughtfully. "Trust your gut, kiddo. I've been in this business long enough to know that when something feels wrong, it usually is. Take today off if you need to. Family comes first, always." "Thank you, Dave. I think I might do that." Sarah appreciated his understanding more than she could express. "If anyone comes around asking questions about me or Emma, could you give me a call right away?" "Absolutely. And, Sarah, I keep a 12 gauge in the office safe. If you need backup, you know where to find me." Sarah smiled, touched by his protective instinct. Dave had no idea what kind of backup she was really capable of providing for herself, but his offer meant everything to her. "Thanks, Dave. I hope it won't come to that." Sarah left work around noon and drove to Emma's school, where she positioned herself in a coffee shop across the street with a clear view of the pickup area. She ordered a sandwich she didn't want and settled in to watch for any unusual activity around the school grounds. The other parents began arriving around 2:30, and Sarah studied each vehicle carefully, looking for anything that seemed out of place. At 3 o'clock sharp, the school doors opened and children streamed out toward their waiting parents. Sarah spotted Emma immediately, her purple dress bright among the crowd of small bodies. She waited until Emma was safely in Mrs. Henderson's sight before leaving the coffee shop and walking across the street to collect her daughter. "Mommy!" Emma ran toward her with arms outstretched, and Sarah caught her in a hug that lifted her off the ground. "Mrs. Henderson said my shell presentation was the best one today." "I'm so proud of you, sweetheart," Sarah said, setting Emma down but keeping hold of her hand. "Tell me all about it while we walk to the car." As they made their way across the parking lot, Sarah noticed a man in a dark jacket standing near the edge of the school property. He was trying to look casual, but his positioning and attention suggested surveillance rather than legitimate business at the school. Sarah memorized his appearance while keeping her body language relaxed and natural, not wanting to alert him that she'd identified his presence. Once Emma was secured in her car seat, Sarah drove away using a circuitous route that would reveal any following vehicles. The man in the dark jacket was nowhere to be seen, but Sarah's unease continued to grow. The surveillance team was adapting their tactics, becoming more subtle but also more persistent. They were closing in on something, and she needed to be ready. Instead of going home, Sarah drove to Riverside Park where she and Emma had played the previous Sunday. The park was busier on a weekday afternoon, with several mothers pushing strollers and toddlers playing on the playground equipment. Sarah chose a bench near the swing set where Emma could play while Sarah maintained a 360-degree view of their surroundings. Emma ran toward the swings with the boundless energy that only 5-year-olds possess, calling back to her mother to watch as she demonstrated her improved pumping technique. Sarah provided the appropriate encouragement while conducting a systematic scan of every person and vehicle in the area. Everything appeared normal, but she'd learned never to take appearances at face value. About 20 minutes into their park visit, Sarah's phone rang. The caller ID showed Marcus Webb's number, and she answered immediately while keeping her eyes on Emma. "Sarah, I've got information, and most of it isn't good," Marcus said without preamble. "I put some feelers out with contacts in various agencies, and your name came up in connection with an active investigation." Sarah's blood chilled. "What kind of investigation?" "Drug trafficking, money laundering, the kind of operation that involves serious players with serious resources. 3 months ago, federal agents raided a warehouse complex where you used to work part-time during your transition out of the service. They found evidence of a major distribution network, but someone tipped off the main players before the raid." Sarah remembered the warehouse job clearly. She'd worked there for about 6 weeks, doing inventory management and shipping coordination while she figured out her next career move. It had seemed like legitimate work, automotive parts distribution for independent repair shops, but now she realized she might have witnessed something that implicated her in criminal activity. "Marcus, I never saw anything suspicious there. Just normal warehouse operations, shipping and receiving. That's what makes this dangerous, Sarah. The feds think someone inside the operation was gathering intelligence, maybe working undercover for a rival organization or planning their own theft of product or money. Your military background makes you a prime suspect for that kind of sophisticated operation." Sarah felt sick as the implications became clear. "So these people watching me think I stole from them or betrayed them to the authorities." "Exactly. And, based on what my contacts are hearing, they're not interested in having a conversation about it. They want to make an example that will discourage anyone else who might be thinking about crossing them." Emma's laughter floated across the playground as she convinced another little girl to join her on the seesaw, completely oblivious to the fact that her mother was learning about threats that could destroy their peaceful life forever. Sarah watched her daughter play and felt a familiar surge of protective fury that she remembered from combat situations where innocent lives were at stake. "How much time do I have?" Sarah asked. "Not much. The intelligence suggests they're moving into the action phase of their plan. Could be hours, could be days, but not weeks." Sarah closed her eyes briefly, feeling the weight of decisions she'd hoped never to have to make. "What about Emma?" "Get her somewhere safe, Sarah. These people don't have limits when it comes to sending messages." A 5-year-old won't be off limits if they think it will hurt you more. The conversation continued for a few more minutes as Marcus provided additional details about the suspected criminal organization and their typical methods of operation. They were ruthless, well-funded, and had connections in law enforcement that made official protection unreliable. Sarah was essentially on her own against an enemy that had been planning their attack for months while she'd been trying to live a normal suburban life. After hanging up, Sarah sat on the park bench watching Emma play and considering her options. She could pack up immediately and disappear with Emma, using skills and contacts from her military career to establish new identities in a different part of the country. But running would mean abandoning everything they'd built together, and there was no guarantee that their enemies wouldn't eventually track them down again. Alternatively, she could stay and fight, using her training and experience to neutralize the threat permanently. But that would mean bringing violence into Emma's world and risking her daughter's safety in ways that no parent should ever have to contemplate. As Sarah weighed these impossible choices, she noticed a familiar black SUV pulling into the park's main entrance. Her body automatically shifted into a state of heightened alertness while her expression remained calm and maternal. The vehicle parked near the playground area, and she could see two figures in the front seats making no effort to get out or engage in normal park activities. They weren't hiding anymore. The surveillance phase was ending, and the action phase was about to begin. "Emma, honey, come here please," Sarah called out, her voice carrying just enough authority to bring her daughter running without question. "What is it, Mommy?" Emma asked as she approached, her cheeks flushed with exertion and happiness. "We need to go home now, sweetheart. But first, I want you to practice that special game we talked about last week." Emma's eyes lit up with excitement. The special game involved Emma hiding in specific locations around their house while Sarah timed how quickly she could find the best hiding spots. To Emma, it was an entertaining activity that made her feel clever and important. To Sarah, it was training that might save her daughter's life if armed men broke into their home. As they walked toward their car, Sarah noted that the black SUV didn't follow them immediately. Instead, it remained in the parking lot with its occupants watching their departure. This suggested coordination with other surveillance teams and confirmed that her enemies were confident enough in their planning to let her go home where they probably intended to finish whatever they'd started. The drive home gave Sarah time to finalize her preparations. She would spend the evening making sure Emma understood the hiding game perfectly, preparing defensive positions throughout the house, and getting ready for a confrontation that would probably happen within the next 24 hours. After that, regardless of the outcome, their quiet life on Maple Street would be over forever. Friday afternoon arrived with deceptive tranquility. Sarah had spent the previous evening preparing their house for what she increasingly believed would be an inevitable confrontation, moving furniture to create better defensive positions and ensuring that Emma's hiding places were both secure and easily accessible. She'd also called in sick to work, telling Dave Morrison that she had a family emergency that required her full attention. Emma seemed to sense her mother's tension despite Sarah's efforts to maintain normal routines. During breakfast, the little girl was quieter than usual, picking at her pancakes and watching Sarah's face with the intuitive concern that children possess when they know something is wrong but can't quite understand what it might be. "Mommy, are you worried about something?" Emma asked as Sarah helped her get dressed for school. Sarah knelt down to Emma's eye level, smoothing her daughter's dark hair and looking into eyes that were so much like her own. "I'm just being extra careful about keeping us safe, sweetheart. Sometimes grown-ups have to do that. Like how you check all the locks at night." Sarah smiled despite her anxiety. Emma was remarkably observant for a 5-year-old, picking up on details that most children would miss entirely. "Exactly like that. You're very smart to notice those things." The drive to Westfield Elementary felt like the most dangerous part of Sarah's day. If her enemies wanted to grab Emma as leverage, the school pickup and drop-off times would provide perfect opportunities. Sarah took a route that included several turns and stops that would reveal surveillance vehicles, but saw no sign of the black SUVs that had been haunting them all week. At school, Sarah again walked Emma inside rather than using the drop-off lane. Mrs. Henderson greeted them both with warm smiles, but Sarah noticed the teacher's eyes held a hint of concern that suggested she was taking Sarah's earlier warnings seriously. "Emma, would you like to help me set up the reading corner while the other children are arriving? Mrs. Henderson asked. Emma nodded enthusiastically and ran toward the classroom, her backpack bouncing as she moved. Sarah watched her daughter disappear into the safety of the school environment and felt a mixture of relief and dread. Emma would be protected for the next 8 hours, but Sarah had a growing conviction that those might be the last normal school hours her daughter would have for a very long time. Mrs. Martinez, Mrs. Henderson said quietly, I wanted you to know that we've implemented some additional security measures today. Mr. Rodriguez has asked our custodial staff to monitor the parking areas more closely, and we've reminded all teachers about our protocols for unknown visitors. Thank you, Sarah replied, genuinely grateful for their vigilance. I hope I'm overreacting, but I'd rather be safe than sorry. Any mother's instinct is worth taking seriously, Mrs. Henderson assured her. We'll keep Emma safe. Sarah left the school feeling slightly more confident about her daughter's security, but her own situation remained precarious. She drove home through a maze of suburban streets, checking her mirrors constantly but seeing no evidence of pursuit. The absence of visible surveillance was actually more troubling than its presence had been. It suggested that her enemies were confident enough in their intelligence to pull back their watchers while they prepared for direct action. Back at the house on Maple Street, Sarah began her final preparations. She retrieved her service weapon from its secure storage location and checked the magazine, ensuring that she had a full load of ammunition and several spare clips readily available. She'd maintained her marksmanship skills with regular practice sessions at a shooting range outside of town, but handling the familiar weight of the pistol brought back memories of situations where accurate shooting had meant the difference between life and death. Sarah also assembled what she privately called her emergency kit: cash, false identification documents, and contact information for people who could help her and Emma disappear if the situation deteriorated beyond her ability to handle it locally. The documents were leftovers from her military service, created for deep cover operations but never used. She'd kept them as insurance against exactly this kind of scenario. Around noon, Sarah positioned herself at the front window where she could observe the street while appearing to be engaged in normal household activities. Maple Street was quiet in the way that suburban neighborhoods always were during weekday afternoons, with most adults at work and children at school. The occasional delivery truck or maintenance vehicle passed by, but nothing seemed unusual or threatening. At 1 o'clock, her phone rang. The caller ID showed an unknown number with a local area code. Hello? Sarah answered, her voice carefully neutral. Mrs. Martinez, this is Detective Rodriguez with the City Police Department. We need to speak with you about some questions that have come up regarding your previous employment. Would it be possible for you to come to the station this afternoon? Every instinct Sarah possessed told her that this was not a legitimate police call. The timing was too convenient, the request too vague, and something about the caller's voice didn't ring true. Real police officers conducting legitimate investigations didn't usually make appointments by phone for questioning related to employment issues. I'm sorry, Detective, but I'm not available this afternoon, Sarah replied. Perhaps you could provide me with your badge number and the specific nature of these questions? I'd like to verify your identity before scheduling any meetings. There was a pause on the other end of the line, just long enough to confirm Sarah's suspicions. Mrs. Martinez, I think it would be in your best interest to cooperate with this investigation. We have some serious concerns about your activities, and it would be much better for everyone involved if we could resolve this matter quietly. The threat was barely veiled, and Sarah felt her protective instincts surge in response. These people were trying to lure her away from her home, probably to a location where they could question her about the warehouse operation or simply eliminate her as a potential threat to their business. Either way, she had no intention of making their job easier. Detective, I'll need to call the police station directly to verify your identity and schedule an appointment through official channels, Sarah said firmly. I'm sure you understand the need for proper procedures in these matters. Mrs. Martinez, I don't think you understand the seriousness of this situation. We know about your daughter, and we know about your routine. It would be very unfortunate if this investigation had to expand to include other members of your family. The line went dead, leaving Sarah staring at her phone with a mixture of rage and determination. They had threatened Emma directly, crossing the one line that transformed this from a dangerous situation into an active war zone. Sarah Martinez, the suburban mother, might have been willing to negotiate or even run away, but Sarah Martinez, the Navy SEAL, was now fully engaged and ready for combat. Sarah immediately called Emma's school, reaching Mrs. Henderson directly. "This is Sarah Martinez. I need you to implement your highest security protocols immediately. Do not release Emma to anyone except me, regardless of what identification they might show or what authority they claim to have. If anyone other than me attempts to pick her up, call 911 and, then, call the number I gave you for Marcus Webb." "Mrs. Martinez, has something happened?" Mrs. Henderson's voice was tight with concern. "I've received direct threats against Emma. Please keep her inside the main building and away from windows until I can get there to pick her up. We'll take care of her." "Should I call the police?" Sarah hesitated, unsure whether local law enforcement could be trusted given the sophisticated nature of the threat she was facing. "Not yet, but be prepared to if anything unusual happens. I'll be there as soon as I can." After hanging up, Sarah called Marcus Webb's secure number. He answered on the first ring, as if he'd been waiting for her call. "They just made their move," Sarah said without preamble. "Threatened Emma directly and tried to lure me to a fake police meeting." "Time to go operational," Marcus replied immediately. "Get Emma and disappear until we can neutralize this threat." "No," Sarah said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "Running just delays the inevitable and puts other innocent people at risk. I'm going to end this here and now. Sarah, you can't take on an entire criminal organization by yourself." "I'm not planning to take on the whole organization. Just the team they've sent to handle me. Once I eliminate the immediate threat, the rest of them will think twice about continuing this operation." Marcus was quiet for a moment, and Sarah knew he was weighing her capabilities against the magnitude of what she was proposing. He'd seen her in action during some of the most dangerous operations their SEAL team had ever undertaken, and he understood better than most what she was capable of when properly motivated. "What do you need from me?" he finally asked. "Emergency extraction for Emma if things go wrong. I'm sending you the address of her school and her teacher's contact information. If you don't hear from me by 6 o'clock tonight, get her and disappear." "Roger that. And, Sarah? Make them regret threatening your little girl." After ending the call, Sarah began her final tactical preparations. She changed into dark clothing that would provide better concealment and freedom of movement, secured additional weapons and ammunition in strategic locations throughout the house, and prepared improvised defensive measures using household items and skills learned during demolitions training. At 3 o'clock, she called Emma's school again. "Mrs. Henderson, I need you to keep Emma there until I call you again. Tell her that Mommy had to take care of some important business and we'll pick her up as soon as possible." "Of course, Mrs. Martinez. She's safe here with us." Sarah hung up and settled in to wait. The confrontation was coming, probably within the next few hours, and she intended to be ready for it. She'd spent 3 years trying to be just another suburban mother, but some roles could never be completely abandoned. Today, she would have to become a warrior again, not for country or mission, but for the most important thing in her life, her daughter's safety and their chance at a peaceful future together. Outside her window, Maple Street looked exactly as it had when they first moved into the neighborhood, quiet and safe and normal. But Sarah knew that appearance was about to be shattered by violence that would change everything, and she was prepared to do whatever it took to ensure that when the dust settled, she and Emma would still be alive to start over somewhere new. The attack came at 4:30 in the afternoon, during the quiet lull between school dismissal and the evening rush hour when Maple Street was at its most deserted. Sarah had positioned herself in the living room where she could observe both the front and back approaches to the house, her service weapon within easy reach and her mind in the tactical state she remembered from countless dangerous missions. She saw them coming before they reached her property, 3 men moving with the coordinated precision of a professional team. 2 approached from the front while the 3rd circled toward the back door, their movements suggesting military or law enforcement training. They wore dark clothing and tactical gear, and Sarah could see the outlines of weapons beneath their jackets. these weren't random criminals or amateur thugs. They were skilled operators who had planned this assault carefully and expected to encounter minimal resistance from a suburban single mother. They had no idea they were walking into the home of someone who had survived firefights in some of the world's most dangerous places. Sarah moved away from the window and took position behind the heavy oak dining table she'd repositioned earlier to provide cover while maintaining sightlines to both the front and back entrances. Her heart rate was elevated but controlled, her breathing steady and deep. The familiar calm of combat readiness settled over her like an old friend returning after a long absence. The front doorbell rang, followed by an authoritative knock. "Police! Open up!" Sarah almost smiled at the amateur nature of the deception. Real police would have announced themselves more specifically, provided warrant information, and followed proper procedures for entering a residence. These men were counting on civilian fear and compliance to get them inside where they could control the situation. "I'm calling my lawyer," Sarah shouted toward the front door, her voice carrying just the right note of confused fear. "You can't come in here without a warrant." She heard quiet conversation between the men outside, followed by the sound of tools being applied to her front door lock. Sarah had reinforced the door frame and installed high-quality deadbolts specifically for this kind of scenario, but determined intruders with the right equipment could still breach most residential security measures given enough time. The back door received similar attention, and Sarah realized they intended to enter from both directions simultaneously to overwhelm her with multiple threats. It was a sound tactical approach that would have worked perfectly against an ordinary civilian, but Sarah was anything but ordinary. As the sound of forced entry grew more urgent, Sarah moved to a position that would allow her to engage targets at both entrances while maintaining cover behind her improvised defensive position. She checked her weapon one final time, ensuring a round was chambered and the safety was disengaged. The front door burst open first, followed immediately by the back entrance. Two men rushed through the front while the third came through the kitchen, all of them moving with weapons drawn and ready. They expected to find a terrified woman hiding somewhere in the house, probably cowering in a bedroom or bathroom and easy to capture. Instead, they found themselves facing a trained Navy SEAL who had been waiting for them in a carefully prepared defensive position. Sarah's first shot took down the lead man coming through the front door, a center mass hit that dropped him immediately. Her second and third shots engaged the man entering through the kitchen, putting him down before he could properly assess the situation or return effective fire. The third attacker, entering behind his partner through the front door, managed to get off several shots that splintered the oak table Sarah was using for cover. But Sarah had anticipated this kind of response and had prepared multiple defensive positions throughout the room. She rolled to her left, coming up behind the couch with a clear shot at the remaining threat. Her fourth shot ended the engagement. The entire confrontation lasted less than 30 seconds, but Sarah remained in position for several more minutes, listening for additional threats and ensuring that all three attackers were neutralized. When she was confident that the immediate danger had passed, she moved through the house conducting a systematic clearance of every room, checking for additional intruders or evidence of surveillance equipment. The house was secure, but Sarah knew this was only the beginning of a much larger problem. The criminal organization that had sent these men would eventually realize that their team had failed, and they would likely respond with either additional attacks or increased pressure through other channels. She and Emma couldn't stay here, and they couldn't rely on local law enforcement for protection given the sophisticated nature of the threat they were facing. Sarah called Marcus Webb's secure line while beginning to gather essential items for immediate departure. "It's done," she said when he answered. "3 hostiles neutralized, but we need to move fast." "Injuries?" Marcus asked. "None on my side." But this was just the advance team. The main organization will be planning their response as soon as they realize these guys aren't reporting back. "I'm already en route to Emma's location. Should be there in 20 minutes. Sarah felt a surge of relief that her daughter would be in Marcus's protective custody soon. "Where do you want to rendezvous?" "There's a safe house about 2 hours north of your location. I'll text you the address and GPS coordinates. Can you be ready to move in 15 minutes? Already packing." Sarah disconnected the call and moved through her house with military efficiency, gathering cash, documents, weapons, and essential clothing for herself and Emma. She also retrieved the emergency bag she'd prepared earlier, containing everything they would need to disappear completely if the situation required it. Before leaving, Sarah took a moment to look around the home they'd shared for such a brief time. The living room bore the scars of the recent battle, with bullet holes in the walls and blood on the hardwood floors. The peaceful suburban life she'd tried so hard to build for Emma lay in ruins, destroyed by enemies she'd never seen coming and violence she'd hoped never to bring into their world. But Emma was safe, and Sarah was alive to continue protecting her. Everything else could be rebuilt or replaced. Sarah's phone rang as she was loading her car with their essential belongings. The caller ID showed a local number she didn't recognize. "Yes," she answered cautiously. "Mrs. Martinez, this is Detective Williams with the city police. We've received reports of gunshots in your neighborhood and need to speak with you immediately." This time, Sarah was certain the call was legitimate. Neighbors would have heard the gunfire and called 911, and real police officers would now be responding to investigate the disturbance. But Sarah couldn't afford to be detained for questioning while Emma remained vulnerable and the criminal organization planned their next move. "Detective, I'm not at home right now," Sarah said, which was technically true since she was standing in her driveway. "But I can tell you that 3 armed men broke into my house and attempted to assault me. I defended myself using a legally owned firearm, and you'll find their bodies inside. Mrs. Martinez, you need to stay at the scene until we can conduct a proper investigation." "I'm sorry, Detective, but I have reason to believe this was part of a larger criminal conspiracy, and my daughter's safety requires me to relocate immediately. I'll contact you through my attorney once we're secure." Sarah hung up before the detective could respond and finished loading her car. Police sirens were growing louder in the distance, but she would be gone before they arrived at the scene. She would deal with the legal consequences later, after Emma was safe and the immediate threat had been neutralized. As Sarah drove away from Maple Street for the last time, she felt a mixture of sadness and determination. The peaceful life she'd built there was over, destroyed by enemies who had underestimated both her capabilities and her willingness to protect her daughter. But Emma was safe, the immediate threat had been eliminated, and Sarah had proven to herself that she could still do whatever was necessary when the people she loved were in danger. The safe house Marcus had arranged was an isolated cabin in the mountains, surrounded by dense forest and accessible only through a winding dirt road that would make surprise attacks difficult. Emma was waiting there with Marcus when Sarah arrived, safe but confused about the sudden change in their routine. "Mommy!" Emma ran to her with tears in her eyes. "Uncle Marcus said we had to leave our house because of bad men." Sarah knelt down and pulled her daughter into a fierce hug, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo and feeling the solid reality of her small body. "That's right, sweetheart. But the bad men can't hurt us anymore, and we're going to find a new place to live where we'll be safe." "Are we going to live in the mountains forever?" Emma asked, looking around at the unfamiliar surroundings. "No, just until Mommy can make sure it's safe for us to find a new home. Think of it as a camping adventure." Emma's face brightened at the suggestion. "Can we make s'mores?" "Absolutely," Sarah promised, grateful for her daughter's resilience and innocence. Over the next several days, Marcus used his contacts in law enforcement and intelligence agencies to gather information about the criminal organization that had targeted Sarah. The warehouse operation had been more extensive than originally believed, involving drug trafficking, money laundering, and connections to international criminal networks. The 3 men who had attacked Sarah's house were identified as professional contractors with records of violence and intimidation. More importantly, the organization's leadership had apparently decided that pursuing Sarah further would be more costly than profitable. The loss of their 3-man team and the realization that their target was a trained military operator had convinced them to write off their concerns about the warehouse investigation and focus their attention on other business opportunities. 2 weeks after the confrontation on Maple Street, Marcus informed Sarah that it was safe for her and Emma to begin rebuilding their lives. The criminal organization had moved their operations to a different part of the country, and federal authorities had closed their investigation of the warehouse incident without charging Sarah with any crimes. Sarah and Emma eventually settled in a small town in Colorado, where Sarah found work as a wilderness survival instructor and Emma enrolled in a local elementary school known for its outdoor education programs. Their new home was more isolated than Maple Street had been, but it was also more defensible and closer to the kind of natural environment where Sarah felt most comfortable. Emma adapted to their new life with the remarkable flexibility that children possess, making friends quickly and embracing the outdoor activities that their mountain location made possible. She never asked detailed questions about why they'd had to leave their old house so suddenly, and Sarah was grateful that her daughter had been spared the traumatic details of that final confrontation. 3 months after their move to Colorado, Sarah received a package with no return address. Inside, she found a newspaper clipping about a multi-state law enforcement operation that had dismantled a major drug trafficking network, along with a brief handwritten note from Marcus, problem permanently solved. You and Emma are clear to live however you want. That evening, as Sarah watched Emma play in the snow outside their mountain cabin, she reflected on the journey that had brought them to this place. She'd tried to leave her military past behind and become just another suburban mother, but when that peaceful life was threatened, she'd been forced to become a warrior again to protect the thing that mattered most to her. The experience had taught her that some skills could never be completely abandoned, and some responsibilities never truly ended. She would always be a mother first, but she would also always be capable of whatever actions were necessary to keep Emma safe. As Emma ran toward the house with snow in her hair and laughter in her voice, Sarah felt a deep sense of contentment that had nothing to do with the violence she'd been forced to use and everything to do with the peaceful life they were now free to build together. They'd survived their encounter with the darkness, and now they could focus on creating a future filled with light.